Welcome back to the political podcast today. It's been nearly a year actually since we've had our last interview. And in these next couple of interviews, we will be focusing more towards politicians' stories before they entered Parliament. And today we are privileged to be joined by the newly elected, not newly, it's been nearly a year, but the newly elected Northeastern Metropolitan Region member, Nick McGowan. Nick, thank you for joining us today.
No problem. It's awesome to be here. And you're right, it does still feel new. And I still do say I'm newly elected, although it's almost a year to the month, right? What is, in fact.
Yeah, it's almost because the election was on the 26th, so it's nearly been a year exactly.
It's crazy. It's gone quick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, just before we start the interview, if you could maybe give a little brief description of yourself before we start. I mean, a lot of the questions we're going to be asking are a lot about your life before politics and some of the things that you want to achieve being now elected as a member of parliament. But if you could give us a little brief description of yourself, that'd be great for the audience.
Sure. Look, I think I've been really fortunate because I think at a young age, I had a passion for politics. And I think that sort of manifested itself first in terms of just being at school, I mean, passionate about local issues. Or for me, I think I remember primary school, I was passionate about being very much against testing on animals for cosmetic products and those kinds of things. That's the sort of stuff that worried me in grade 5 and 6. I was also worried about the ozone layer and recycling. So these are sort of issues that continue to this day, and kids obviously, like I did, still continue to think about and want to address in some way. And I think after then going through primary school, secondary school, I was involved in the SRC and got involved in other opportunities where I was exposed to politics. I was always passionate about politics. So I also was able to wed that passion with an equal passion to be interested in international affairs and things that happen around the globe. And I was very conscious that if ever I got into politics, I suppose, well, when I was going to get into politics, you had to have that sort of steely determination, that I didn't want to simply be like everyone else. I wanted to have some experiences that I think I was confident I could draw upon. So I went and lived in the United Kingdom, did some work with the UNICEF UK committee, voluntary work on child soldiers, and wrote a paper for them. I worked for the National Consumer Council in the UK, the Disability Rights Commission, Westminster City Council. And then I found myself on a path where I began some work with the UN in Congo, Brazzaville, a Francophone speaking country, and loved that opportunity. Worked for UNDP. And that was the beginning of an equal love affair, really, with international development, international humanitarian assistance, international peacekeeping, civilian. And that really took me to places in the end, like Burundi, which at that point were in the middle of their war. I went back there later when they were a peacekeeping operation. Afghanistan, Liberia, when Charles Taylor fled Liberia, a little work in Rwanda and Uganda. The Iraq program based in Jordan and in Cyprus. And that was after the UN headquarters had been bombed. And then eventually back to New York with UNDP at the end of my stint with UN. So I was very, very fortunate. And most of that was pre-family. So they're all non-family duty stations, as they call them. And most of that were sort of high security environments where you'd have regular periods off. So that also gave me an opportunity to go and travel to other countries, which were also countries I fell in love with and continue to love to this day, and their people. Places like Yemen, Djibouti, Ethiopia, the list goes on, but they're just a few of them. So I've been very fortunate. Two passions in my life. One is the international assistance and work overseas, and the other one is politics.
Yeah, you seem like a very, very well-traveled man, going around all across Africa.
You can say young man.
I mean, how old are you now, Nick? I
You
actually
ain't
don't
gonna
know.
say that. 36. That's not true. Fact check that, boys and girls.
Yeah, because I've always been interested in going to like those sort of Middle Eastern countries, especially like Yemen and Afghanistan. I've watched a lot of YouTubers who've gone there, and it looks like a very, very interesting place. The culture's amazing, the scenery looks really, really cool.
Yemen's unbelievable. It's one of the most beautiful cities, countries rather, in the world. Sana'a is like going back in time. It's like going back to biblical times. It's unbelievable. It is that breathtaking. I remember I went on one of the visits. I've been to Yemen a few times, and I was in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of desert, really. And there you had to travel at that point in time, you had to travel with a policeman and a soldier, and neither of which looked like a policeman or soldier. Really, all they had was an AK-47. So you're there with two men with AK-47s, and presumably for my own protection. But they were showing me what was this. They were telling me it was this ancient place that I was at, and this ancient dam system in Mardib, it's called. And sure enough, I had no idea when I was there. I was along for the ride, really, and I was going to this town. And sure enough, I then researched later on, and it was quite a remarkable, unbelievable infrastructure and dam that was in place there. And then we went to other places that were, there's a presumed ex-palace of Cleopatra and these kinds of things. Just absolutely divine. A beautiful country and beautiful people. And unfortunately struck, like so many countries are from time to time, by war and conflict.
Yeah, with their whole civil war. I think they called a ceasefire a couple of years ago, maybe. I can't remember
Yeah,
exactly. Something like
yeah.
that. Yeah, such a shame. It's a really good country, though, from what I've heard. So when the war finishes, I think a lot of people should go out to Yemen and check it out.
Yeah, be amazing.
All right, then. I think we'll get started now with the questions that we have. So we've prepared about 6 to 7 questions. I don't know if we'll get through all of them.
Yeah.
But I think Tobias, you have the first question.
Yes. On your parliamentary website, you talk about your childhood struggle with a family breakdown. Some of our audience today are going through similar situations in their lives. Not to bring back any trauma, could you briefly talk about your experience with your family breakdown?
Yeah, sure. I suppose when I was growing up, most of my mates' parents were married and together. That doesn't say they were happily together, of course, but they were married. So I think I only had one mate in primary school that likewise their parents had split up when they were young. So my parents split up when I was very young. So for me, there wasn't a lot of trauma. Well, really very little trauma, I would say. I have some memories of my parents fighting, but not untoward sort of fighting, something that would give us, broader concern other than just disagreements. But I think it happened to me that when I was so young that really my normal was being brought up by my mother and my brother there. So it was the three of us. So in many respects, I think I was fortunate because I didn't know any different. I think perhaps for children when they're in their young teens or maybe late single digits, it can be harder when you're used to having a mother and father around, and then that there is that divide, that it's harder for them to adapt to that. And then if you add another parent figure or a figure that wants to tell you what to do, I do remember my mother did, um, I would say, date people from time to time, but we were probably very lucky with my mother. She was very protective of my brother and I, and we were sort of always first and foremost the priority to her, regardless of the men that came and went. But I do remember also, I was, had there been a more permanent male presence, I'm not sure that I would have been the easiest stepson to have to control, because I remember distinctly, and I sort of carry this forth perhaps. I never responded very well to being told what to do by anyone other than my mother and my father. And I think most kids have that general sort of approach. In life, who needs another person to line up to tell you what to do? It's enough with mum and dad telling you what to do. You don't want more people joining that club. I hope, for people in that situation where it's much more common now. In fact, you'd say it's almost more common that parents do split up and divorce and there's new partners. I think kids have become much more robust and perhaps accustomed to that, and hopefully that transition's not as difficult as perhaps it was for many kids years ago.
Yeah. So you mentioned there you have you have a brother. Is he older or younger?
He is older, an elder
Oh,
brother.
that must have
Yeah.
been nice to have an older brother around, during your childhood.
Yes and no, because like any family, you don't choose your family. I love my brother, but my brother didn't need a younger brother. He was very independent. He was and is an Aries. So if any of you are Aries, I apologize to you all. They're very strong-willed, very independent. I think a younger brother to him was more of an annoyance and a disruption and a distraction. And I would have always loved to have had a younger brother or sister. And my father being married, he had a little girl with his new wife, my half sister. So that was awesome. But they were based in Queensland and then Cairns for a while, and they eventually came back down to Melbourne. And then I had my stepbrother and stepsister as well. So that was also cool. So there are, the fact that you have both of my parents are now passed away, and they passed away relatively not young, but not old either. But so the only parent figure I have now is my stepmom, and she's great. She was always awesome. She never distinguished between myself and my brother when we went over to my dad's place, and treated us great. And so it's actually, were not for that fact, I wouldn't have any sort of parent figure left at all. So, silver linings, right?
Yeah. That's good though, because of course, like with you have a bit of a more extended family with your half siblings from other parents. So I'm guessing that
100%.
means you got like yeah, it
Yeah.
gives you a lot of different experiences as well with different siblings. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know with you guys how big your family is, but I love the idea of a big family. So for me, to have more people that you can draw upon or speak to, or just that you've had those life experiences with, particularly as you get older too, I think you'll probably realize that if you have those people with shared experience as you get older, it's nice to keep hold of them and to remember those things, because as you get older, those people do start to pass away, and you do start to sort of, the group you have surrounding you diminishes.
Exactly. Because from my personal experience, I'm an only child. I think Tobias and George, you both have siblings, correct?
Yeah, I got
Um,
one brother.
and George, you have an older sister, right?
Yeah, older sister.
Yeah, so I guess our experiences probably would be different to yours as well, since you have such a big extended family, Nick.
Yeah, and is your father still around, or is he remarried, or are you
Oh
with
no,
your
yeah,
mum?
my dad's still around, so
Yeah.
so is my mum, so we're still close knit family.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And no other kids, no other stepbrothers, stepsisters, half sisters?
No, no, even though
Not
my
yet.
parents married, not yet. Even though my parents married very, very late, I'm the only one. So yeah,
Awesome.
so because my parents married when they were like 46 and 50 respectively, 45,
Wow.
49. Yeah, so
Yeah,
very,
okay.
very late.
And did they have you before they married or after?
After, so
Yeah, yeah.
I was born 2 months before my mum turned 46.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good effort. Good effort by your mum.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I was probably a very last one. Very, very last one.
Oh, wow. Well, you're a bit of a miracle child then for her, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah, so we'll get now to the next question. This is going to be talking more about your high school and university life. So, how was your high school and university life, and do you have any vivid memories of it?
Yeah, got lots of memories of high school. So I went to actually went to Ivanhoe Primary to start with, what I think was prep, although some people now call it foundation, but prep. And then I went to Monty South, so Montmorency South primary school up to year 6, then graduated. Then high school, I was at Eltham High for all but a short period or a year and a bit, I think it was, at Galvin Park Secondary College in Werribee. So it was a bit split between Werribee and Eltham, but majority Eltham. I couldn't wait to get out of primary school. I hated primary school. I don't know why. I didn't do very well. I think that maybe that's in part why. I remember my mother marching down to primary school demanding that I do remedial English because I could neither read nor write particularly well. I still can't spell well at all. So I'm a hopeless speller. Um, a better reader these days, thank goodness. But so I struggled, and I was not great academically. Certainly not at primary school. And I think part of my problem was I started younger. Boys, we have this system in Australia, but in many parts of the world where you start given your age. But I think it's my own hypothesis, but I think we know scientifically boys mature later than girls, yet we still treat them the same. I think that's part of what's wrong with the education system. I think we have to understand it. As my mother did, and she would say consistently, she should have kept my brother and I, who were both born in March and April, we should have kept those down a year and allowed us to mature a little bit more. And I think life would have been a lot easier for both of us. And I think that's very true. So I think by the time I went to high school, I loved being at high school. I don't know that I loved politics already. So I had my passion even at that stage in year 7 and 8. So were it not for that, I'm not sure what I might have ended up doing. But I think knowing that you're interested in politics and having that. I remember at the time at Eltham High, there was a chap by the name of Merrick Watts, who's a comedian that you may have heard of, but you may not have. And he was the class clown. And he did nothing but
As you do.
all the time, as you do. And boys love that. So, because it, commensurate with their maturity at that point. And he mucked around the whole time, and he would tell the teachers, I'm going to do this for a living, blah, blah, blah. And he did. He went on to become a comedian and had some success. So, high school was great, but I was always very keen to get on with life. I wanted to get out there and do politics and get into politics. And I think if I had my time again, I'd do that very differently. I think I would use the opportunity to learn a lot more. It was ironic that in French, I was one of those, I'd have to say, a smart ass boy who sat at the back saying to my French teacher, the poor lady, whose English wasn't great, but her French was, why do I need this? When am I ever going to use this? And sure enough, the karma bus hit me right in the backside when, of course, one of my early jobs with the UN, in fact, my first job with the UN was in French-speaking Africa. So if only she could see me now. So
have you kept up your French since then?
I have. It's not perfect. It's nowhere near perfect, but I have. And more than that, I think the lessons I've learned, I've tried to apply to my own children to make sure that they, A, don't have the attitude I had, and B, that they actually are supported and directed in a way that makes sure that they prioritise languages. Because to me, having worked and spent a lot of time overseas, the greatest gift, both in terms of just how our children's brains are wired, but also how that opens doors to other possibilities. The greatest gift we can give any kid is a second language. And if they have a third or fourth or fifth, and that's awesome. And so many people that we're going to be up against in the world competitively for jobs and other things, it's not unusual in Europe and other parts of the world, Africa, the Middle East, they will speak 3, 4, 5 languages with ease. So in Australia, we're very, very much behind. And sadly, and I say this to every citizenship ceremony I go to when I speak to new migrant parents, and I say to them, don't stop speaking your own languages. And it's hard for them because they want to immerse into English, so they understand English and the kids understand it. They desperately want their kids to be really good with English too, which I get. But I encourage them at the same time to keep up their own language, because ultimately the English here will take care of itself because they're being taught it and they're immersed in it in Australia. But if they lose their parents' language, then that's a real tragedy in my mind.
Yeah, because
go on.
Yeah, so I myself am half Filipino, so my mum's from the Philippines. So I actually don't speak Tagalog very well. I can understand it to an extent, but I think because my dad's Australian, so it's very hard for my mum to communicate at home, especially when it's one parent's from the Philippines, one's not. So, I mean, I hear my mum talking to my aunts and uncles in Tagalog sometimes, so I pick it up from there a little bit, but I'm definitely not the best at Tagalog at all. And I think
Yeah.
Tobias and George as well, if you could talk, do you want to talk a little bit about your multicultural backgrounds and where you're from as well,
Yeah,
quickly?
so my mum is from Chennai, from India. So she speaks Tamil. My dad's from, I believe, Bangalore, and it's a different type of language. And I don't actually understand it because I left when I was 2.5 to Australia, so I don't understand it at all.
Mm.
George, what about you?
Yes, I'm from India as well. So I'm from a state called Kerala, and we speak Malayalam, and I speak that at home with my family and stuff.
You do?
Yeah,
Yeah. And can you understand anything your parents say?
yeah, I can.
Awesome. Well, keep it up. And to you, Toby and Francis, you sit your parents down tonight and say to them, listen, we've got a problem.
Yeah, we got to pick it up.
Well, it's not just about you guys, right? And you won't be thinking about this now, I'm sure, but it's actually about when you guys get older and you have your own kids, for your kids to be able to talk to your parents, their grandparents, is awesome. Like, because otherwise they miss out on a whole part of their world and life that right now might not seem relevant to you, but later on it is. It's just something that's a special connection between them. Over and above the fact, if you guys do in your different careers find yourself in India or the Philippines or any other parts of the world, have that, and to be able to speak English like you do, wow, you've got the world at your feet. So if I can encourage you all to do that, awesome.
Yeah, not you don't even have to learn, your cultural language. If you even learn because in our school they offer Italian and Japanese and Spanish. Like even if you learn another language as well, that's still really, really important.
Yeah. I mean, look, if I had my way, I would make, I think Australia should have a second official language, and I don't care which one it is. Like, just pick one, because I think all the science tells us that as soon as children have one or two languages, one certainly, but two obviously, it actually starts to change the way your brain's wired, and you find that in those children or people that once they've got a couple of languages, it's very easy for them to learn the second, the third, the fourth. Like it helps enormously. So whatever it is, Australia wants to make as its second or third, I don't care. Have three, if all we do is have children who can read and write exceptionally well, and obviously English is a starting point. But if we can do that in another language as well, that'd be amazing. Although I am conscious we are struggling to do it in one language, let alone two at this stage, sadly. And
Yeah,
I'm a testament to that, right? I'm a great testament to certainly primary school level, getting away with it, and then maybe in high school I caught up a bit.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the big problems with our education system. We are falling a bit behind compared to other nations, especially, the Asian nations. But I mean, I have researched a lot with Asian nations specifically, about their education systems, and with South Korea and those sort of countries, like they really, really push it into them to study. So I think I've watched documentaries where like South Korean kids, they get up at they go to school like at 7 a.m. They come back home at 5 and then they have tutoring and that goes to 10 p.m. So they basically just don't have a life outside of school. You just
Yeah,
eat, sleep in school for like
yeah, and that's not
five,
healthy,
six
right? I
days a
mean,
week.
and it's really rote learning, and a lot of it, even in this country, is you're teaching to test, and the private schools I think do that a lot. They teach the test, so it's really that artificially props up the results, I think. So I think there's a lot to sort out there. I'm other than knowing the basics, I think there's a huge, and I know very many awesome teachers and principals try to do this. It's really about trying to instill that critical thinking. You know, don't be afraid to be polite, but put the opposition, put the other point of view, or push back on someone who's putting a point of view and say, well, hang on, what about this? That sort of critical thinking will put our country on a much better pathway than just, as you say, in some countries where they're much more obedient in what they're, this is what we'll teach you, this is what you think, and therefore we'll go that direction.
Yeah. I think Tobias, did you want to say something quickly just before?
Yeah, the Zoom is about to end, so we'll just quickly make a new one. Yeah.
And then
So
we'll send you the new Zoom link and then we'll
yeah,
come back. So probably be in 3-4 minutes we'll be back.
yeah,
If that's okay with you, Nick.
Yeah, of course it is. Absolutely. Just
yeah,
time for commercial break, right?
yeah,
Yeah, basically, yeah. We'll have a little 2-3 minute ad break and we'll be back. Just
yeah,
go grab a coffee, whatever, get a drink, and yeah,
yeah,
we'll
Refresh.
see you then, Nick. Yeah,
Sounds
yeah,
great.
yep.
see you.
Remember, Republicans eat their young. They really do. They eat their young. Terrible statement, but it's true.
I'm here in Ottawa for you know what. I'm finishing my 99 county tour for the 43rd year in a row.
Welcome back to the podcast after a little short break there. Little
Into
advertisement break. We're
exactly.
back. So yeah, we'll get back into the questions that we were asking. I believe Tobias, you have the third question we're going to ask Nick here.
Uh, oh, how was your Year 12 experience specifically? Can you briefly discuss it?
Sure. I'm trying to recall sort of what stands out to me. It's very different these days. When I go to schools, I'm just in awe at how they treat that whole sort of year 11, 12 experience, particularly year 12, obviously. Whereas back when I went to school, like I barely remember there even being a graduation ceremony. In fact, I can't even I don't think, other than like a school assembly, which might not have even included the whole school, I don't even have a recollection of a graduation at all.
Really?
So yeah, not at all. Same with primary school. Like
'Cause
primary school, you finished grade
yeah,
6, well done. Sort of next. So I think, for me, because I was so focused on what I wanted to do next, I sort of missed an opportunity really from high school to uni. And then when like so many kids, I suppose, I knew what I wanted. It's like, it's a bit different if you want to do a trade because you can sort of jump straight into it. With me, because I wanted to do politics, there's no pathway. So you had a billion pathways. And so the question is, which way do you go? And I enrolled in university and I did a general Bachelor of Arts, which again was, I wouldn't recommend it by itself because I think you have to give yourself, when you finish university, you want to come, whether it's a teaching degree or an accounting or of science or whatever it is your speciality, you've got to come out of that with some sort of, in my view, some sort of speciality. So you've got a value add, you've got a currency that you can work with in the real world. Just having, in those days, you could just do a Bachelor of Arts and that's it by itself. And that doesn't qualify you for anything. It doesn't qualify you for you to teach, doesn't qualify you for any particular job. Notwithstanding, you might like it and it might provide a round sort of education. But so my at that time I would have been working. I worked pretty early when I was at school, just to make some spare cash. Really, I think I was 11, 12 when I started doing a job that continued through both Eltham High and Galvin Park Secondary College. I loved Galvin Park Secondary College, so shout out to them. I haven't been back there, so I'd love to go back. I really
you should come
enjoyed my
back one
year.
time.
Yeah, I loved my year.
Stop over in Point Cook as well. Come visit us. We're only like 10 minutes
definitely.
away.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. Like when I lived out west, mate, it's like it was even booming in those days, but not. Point Cook was much, much smaller, and you didn't have the overpass, and it had no facilities, had nothing. And I know it's still playing catch up now, but it's much better than what it was 20 years ago, that's for sure. And Werribee was the same, because Werribee was really the satellite city, and then you had Hoppers, which was growing at that stage, but you didn't have Tarneit and all these other, mega suburbs which have now grown up around it. So I'm very fond of that whole area because I know it well. I've ridden my bike or walked around it, most parts of it, and worked in Werribee itself as a kid. So yeah, love the area. So no standout memory for me for year 12, really, other than that desire to actually get in the real world and start working and and put myself on a pathway to achieving what I wanted to achieve. And when I was younger, I think I was very fixed on federal parliament, very fixed on wanting to be prime minister. And age has cured me of both of those desires. I wouldn't wish that job upon myself. And post COVID, I think what was fascinating about state politics is this is the ball game. Like state politics is what gave birth rather to local council. Local council is a product of an act of parliament by the state, and it can go tomorrow. So, state has that power. But likewise, the only reason we have a federation is because the states agreed to it and signed up to it. And in fact, there may come a time in our country's history where some states don't agree to it anymore. West Australia has always been chafing at the bit to end the nationhood, and so
especially with Mark McGowan.
Sorry,
especially with when Mark McGowan was premier, they were talking.
Yeah. So I look, it's, and I say this to people, and I say it with no desire in mind, but the one consistent reality of humankind's existence is the boundaries on maps keep changing all the time. And for Australia to think we are any different is naive, and I would say, well, certainly naive, silly. Like at some point, our country will not look like it does today. We will not maintain the same footprint for whatever reason. History just tells us we're not going to be immune from it. And for some people, that's confronting. I'm not confronted by it so much as I just think it's, change. I suppose I do change well. I'm not wishing it upon us, but I think we have to understand that this is not forever.
Exactly.
It's a long answer to what year 12 was like, right? Sorry to
Great answer. Very, very, very related. Yeah, so we'll get into the next question. I think, George, this will be your first questions. I think you did briefly talk a bit about this at the start of the interview in your brief
Oh,
description of yourself, Nick. But if if George, if you could ask again, and you could talk to us a little bit more about your career before. So yeah, George, if you could ask the question.
Yeah, so my question is that what were some of your previous careers before politics outside of the UN?
Outside of the UN, so I mean, when I was a youngster at primary school, I sold diaries door to door, making some good money. I think I was selling them, I don't know, I'd say it was $10 a diary back then. That was a lot of money.
Oh,
But so I made some good money on that. What my mother was letting me do, knock on doors selling diaries, I don't know. She'd probably at work actually, was the truth. And then I cleaned factories at high school. I was cleaning like I'd go to there's a place that built boats. It was called Avenger Marine. So I'd go there after school, clean the dunnies, clean the bath, the kitchen area, fill up everyone's ashtrays and their coffee cups, sweep the whole bloody floor, all that rubbish. And then I go to the next factory next door where I had the next job. So it was one after the other. And that was a carpentry place. So clean up all the sawdust, same stuff, toilets, bathrooms, all the stuff that the lads don't want to do. And so I did that throughout high school. And then I went, I think maybe 11 or 12, probably 12 maybe. I joined McDonald's. So I started off as a crew member in the city at Elizabeth Street. And I joined the cult of McDonald's, which was, they were great training. Back then, McDonald's had clean stores, hot burgers and hot fries. Now they're all just,
it's not like
it
now.
pains me. As somebody who's been a manager at McDonald's, it pains me. Like the manager I used to work under, if there was a speck out of place on the stainless steel cupboards, I'd be there on my hands and knees, rubbing that damn thing till the speck went. Now, mate, there's fries everywhere. There's crap all over the place. The place looks like bombs hit it. And they're serving burgers. They cook them a fraction. So they changed their model. They used to cook it. I know this is nothing to do with the question, but they used to cook the burgers right there and then and give it to you hot. Now they do like Hungry Jack's. They pre-cook, put in a bain marie, and then they just assemble. So the whole experience to you, your poor generation is now not getting hot hamburgers. You're just getting bain marie burgers. It's a tragedy. You should be marching in the streets, all of you.
Yeah, I know, because I actually work at Maccas, so I know how they're
Speak to me.
cooked, and so
Oh,
they basically cook it and then they put it in like a tray and then they put it in like that keeps it hot. But half the time it doesn't actually stay
oh,
hot because when people open
oh.
it, they're letting all the cold air go into the tray. So
I've got to do an opinion piece by this. I've got a few mates who I worked with back in those days. They were managers. Then now they're franchisee owners. They own a few Maccas, and I'm like, what are they doing? Like the whole look. My concern is the young generation. He's not my concerns, obviously, but when I go to Macca's, it's like there'll be generations who think that's what they sell. That's like a hot burger. It's like, no, it's
no,
lukewarm and it's pretty crappy, and
yeah,
there's no quality control. And unfortunately, it followed the international trend. The international trend went this way, and they went to this big box approach to McDonald's stores where it's sort of they're not even the classical three out, the big arches and the quintessential roof lines, and they're sort of, you could call it naff these days, but it was 60s, 70s architecture, but it was nostalgic, and that's what differentiated their brand from everyone else.
mm,
And now they're just, KFC, Hungry Jack's, Maccas, they're all the same. They just look like a big box, baby bunting outlet, or nothing wrong with that, but they've got a different format, and that's what they've chosen to sort of replicate. So I did my time at McDonald's. I also worked for Red Cross Blood Service. I'll move on before I get caught on McDonald's forever and a day. I worked at the Red Cross Blood Service as their government affairs and public affairs manager. That was awesome because that was all about obviously trying to encourage people to donate blood, plasma. So that was really cool. And all that stuff was sort of between my work in politics, where I worked for just about certainly every premier since on my side of politics, every premier I think we've had. I worked
so
with the media.
Kenneth,
Yeah, I worked for Kenneth when I was a youngster. Yeah,
Bailey, Napthine,
yeah, but
who
the others
else?
were opposition leaders. So I didn't
Yeah,
work for Doyle. I did work for Napthine, but not as opposition leader when he was premier. I did work for Guy. Didn't work for O'Brien. So certainly the premiers, but not all the opposition leaders. But we all, of course, we all know each other quite well.
Yeah.
So that was great, and to experience different governments and different strengths of the governments, and then to be in opposition gives you a really great perspective on how government works while we are at where we're at. There's still a lot about the way government works in Victoria, which is wrong, and we can learn from the mistakes we made, as in my party made in the 90s. We got a lot right, but we got a few things wrong. And with not even Labor have learned from that in the way they structure government. And back in Parliament now as a member of Parliament, I get to see that firsthand. And part of that's around just how they structure departments and the complete absence, I think, complete absence of line of control and accountability and responsibility from minister to department and implementation.
Yeah. We'll just quickly get off the Zoom now and
Yeah.
join another one because
Yeah.
we're about to run out of time.
Well, can you believe it? Christmas is just around the corner. And we've actually now released a limited edition. Oh, hey, that's me. Please explain. Gin. It's a Christmas spirit gin. Wow. So anyway, for those special people in your life, you're thinking about what present to give them, or even you like a good tipple of gin like I do, well then, shout yourself a bottle, or for that special person in your life. And please remember that this does help support our Please Explain cartoons. You know, the ones that you love so much, and we love bringing them to you. So anyway, have a great Christmas.
You can do it, baby. I love you so much. And it's bad news. Bad things are happening. Mom, I'm sorry. Mom, I didn't do
As leader, what responsibility do you have to try to lower the temperature in the building right now? We have a senator on your side challenging a witness to a fight in a hearing. We have former Speaker of the House cold cocking a fellow Republican in the hall. I mean, what is your responsibility as leader to lower the temperature in this environment?
Frankly, I hadn't heard what you just indicated.
I can go on. We have one member calling another member a smurf in a hearing.
Difficult to control the behavior of everybody who's in the building. I don't view that as my responsibility. That's something that the Capitol Police have to deal with.
Okay. So we're back for the third time now. So we've had 2 ad breaks. And yeah, we'll get straight back into the questions. I think, George, you have the next question again, actually.
Oh, yeah. So the question is, what made you go into politics and run in the 2022 election? What made you join the Liberal Party?
What made me join the Liberal Party? I'll answer them sort of together if I can. When I was living in Werribee, actually, I wrote off to, so it was year 11, 10, 11, wrote off to all the major political parties at that time, because I knew I wanted to get into politics and join and so forth. And I wrote off to the Libs, Labor, and Democrats, because there were no such thing as Greens, and asked them to send me their principles, basically, rather than their policies, because my view was at that stage, and it's actually proven to be a good yardstick. And I say this to young people, ignore. Do not worry about who the leader is of the parties. Do not worry about what their policies are, because there's every chance that by the time you join or by the time you lead a long, healthy, happy life, you will love and you will dislike some leader. You will love and dislike, if not hate, some policies. It's just the way it's going to be. Never join a political party because you like a leader. Never join a political party because you like a policy or dislike a leader or policy, because it's a sure way to be very dissatisfied very quickly. Join it because you share their values and their principles. That's why you join. That's for me anyway. And so, having written to those 3 parties, the Liberal Party and its values, and if you see them, they've got like an A4 sheet of values. I don't think there's an Australian that would disagree with anything that's written there at all. You know, it's about reward for effort, about the power of individuals, but it doesn't exclude individuals acting collectively, aka unions and so forth. So it's not anti that at all. And it talks about tolerance and international society, peace and so forth. Because it's all of the Menzian sort of era. So these are sort of old school values that are very inclusive and accepting and championing the individual, no matter what he or she is and who they are, where they're from. So for me, it was a bit of a no-brainer compared to the socialist sort of agenda that comes with the left, which I'm not a subscriber of. I don't think it's worked well overseas. I don't think it usually leads to success, but doesn't, in my view. And then the Democrats were an amalgam of ex-libs, really, who'd come together.
Gone ship, basically.
Yeah, and then continue to lose their way thereafter. And they were sort of like a forerunner to the Greens, I suppose, in a way. You know, there was a space for a third party. And I think after the success of Graham Richardson on the Labor side, who'd almost won an election on environmental issues, the Green motivated people sort of cotton on to there's a force here. There's new generations who do care passionately about the environment and are prepared to vote for it, regardless of the other things we say. So that sort of brought them into being. So that's how I decided to be part of the party. And you know, when I stood for Eltham, when I stood for Jagga Jagga, I'd have many people say, you know, love you, Nick, like you, Nick, you're in the wrong party. You know, it's the ultimate insult. And constantly, it means it doesn't matter what you do or say, you can't convince them to vote for you. And perhaps they're Labor voters anyway, but you know, certainly the name of the game in politics is to try to get people who wouldn't vote for you normally to vote for you, and to convince people that you are going to do a good job for them. And a lot of that's about building a relationship and trust. So for me, that's still where the challenge lies.
So you actually ran in Jagga Jagga, and what was the other seat you ran?
JJ
ran in
ran,
as well?
so that was an 11% seat held by Jenny Macklin. Jenny Macklin was parachuted into the seat. Wasn't a local when she came there, but it's traditional Labor stuff, right? They just parachute someone in.
Yeah.
Less of that on our side, but Labor's renowned for it because they can. I don't know why it's developed like this, but they know that the people there are just going to vote that way, regardless of what happens. And so they, unfortunately, one of the downsides, there's a lot of downsides to it, but one of the downsides is they just parachute people in who don't understand the local community, certainly aren't of it. And Jenny wasn't of it or from it. She then obviously lived there and became part of it. But it's a bit of angst to me because I think, you know, I know what it's like being a member of parliament, living in my electorate, seeing people every day, going to the same supermarkets, bumping into people. It matters. It does matter that you're part of your community. It absolutely matters. And that you understand them and you understand the journey they've been on and what we've come, what we had, where we're going. You know, that's critical from my mind.
Yeah, because a great example of a parachuted candidate was Christina Keneally at the 2022 federal election in Fowler, and Diley ended up winning that seat as well. So it's not always the best case scenario to parachute a candidate in.
Not always. No, it's really not. And often parties will try and you choose a high profile candidate and get away with it that way. I just encourage people to vote selfishly. Vote for the person you think's going to do the best job for the local area. Like, you know, forget the tribalism of and I say that because, you know, there should be some reward for hard work. You don't want members of any political persuasion who do a great local job. And I think there's probably, sadly, too few in that category, because a lot of them get in and then suddenly they're absorbed by the job, the demands, the expectations, what they think they have to do in the parliament and elsewhere. And the more you do that, sometimes the more it takes you away from what you love the most, which is working in your local community. And like everything in life, there's a balance.
Exactly. Yeah, so we'll now get into our second last question, actually. This is this is a little bit more towards maybe some of your heroes in politics. Tobias, if you could ask the question.
Yeah. Who would you say is your political idol? Could be current or past one.
Current or past? I think I'm going to sound like a typical Liberal here. There's a couple on the other side, but I'm not going to point them out because although it would be good to say it, the fact I'm acknowledging there's a couple on the other side that I acknowledge their attributes, but it's nice to give fellow.
I mean, you can share them if you want to.
Liberals to good try. Liberals to point toward. Mate, you know, Thatcher's won on the world stage, and Reagan, but Thatcher in particular, you know, as a woman in a very conservative society, and people always get hung up on the policies and you know, they took away my milk and stuff like that. That's literally what you hear in Britain to this day. If you speak to people of that generation, they remember it. But her strength, and I don't mean just in terms of, you know, going through something regardless and being headstrong about something. That's the sort of strength I'm talking about. I'm just talking about the strength of being able to back yourself, stick to a plan, and see it through. You know, we've had a few leaders in this state who have done that, and Kennett is one of them. You know, when Kennett came in, we were 2 weeks off defaulting on the public paychecks. 2 weeks. So that means in 2 weeks' time, we didn't have enough money in reserve to pay teachers, doctors, nurses. So when Labor bang on about, oh, we sacked these people, blah, 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 it's like, well, hang on. Number one, you didn't have enough money to pay their wages. So that's how much you cared about them. Number two, you also had unfunded liabilities, complete unfunded liabilities in terms of superannuation. So the whole nest egg for the future, again, when you hear Labor bang on about, you know, the looking after workers and the nest egg and superannuation, well, this is the very party who bankrupted Victoria. So much so that we had to sell the state bank to Paul Keating and the Commonwealth, who then changed it to the Commonwealth Bank, and then they privatised it. So my message to anyone out there who's interested in politics is be also a student of history. So when any side of politics talks and sort of pulls at those heartstrings, so-called, and make glib comments about privatisation or job losses, they ask themselves the question, well, how did we get to that point? You know, how are we so maladministered that we actually had to make such radical changes? And the truth is, at the end of those processes, we were employing, because you had to, as the economy grows, more doctors, more nurses, more teachers, and no one wanted to get rid of anyone at all. That is just the truth, but it sometimes is not as easy to explain. So Thatcher, absolutely. Reagan, absolutely, because they were committed to an ideology. They were committed by principle, not just by the partisan politics. And Jeff, because locally, he provided certainty and stability. You know, when he said something, it went, he meant it. And that was a real currency in the 80s. So many politicians would flip-flop and be all over the place. And he had a vision for Victoria. He wanted Victoria to thrive. So again, even though he has his critics, those who I think are being balanced will concede that he wanted the best for Victoria. And he certainly, you know, the basis for our healthcare system in this country is based on Victoria, which is based on Kennett and the Kennett government. They haven't changed it. Labor hasn't changed it. The basis for our industrial relations in Victoria were based on the Kennett years. And again, despite all the years Labor have been in government for state-wise, they haven't changed it. They haven't taken back the laws to the state level. They can. They could do it tomorrow. If they really wanted to, and they really want to care that much, they could do it tomorrow. They haven't. So that's health, that's industrial relations. The basis for the education system, the restructure that had there, still the same as it is today. The basis for the council system, the reforms there, we had something like 300 plus councils. We were over-administered. It hadn't been changed since Federation. So we still have inherited the same council-based structure that was implemented by Kennett. And if you look back in history, so he was elected in 1992, 3rd of October 1992, re-elected in 96 with an increased majority. Lost the next election, but they had more members of parliament, but it was minority. And Labor at that time were very good at bringing on board the 3 independents, which then gave them a majority. So despite the fact that the Liberal Party had more members of parliament. So goes history, right?
It is history. And then we don't talk about 2002 backslide.
Yeah. And look, credit to them, you know, when they get in, they're very successful tacticians. No doubt about that. And they're very successful at campaigning. And we can still, I hate to say it, we can still learn a lot from that because they're very clever. Yeah.
Very, very clever in some circumstances, yeah. So yeah, we'll get now to our final question. So finally, what's one piece of advice you'd give to students in 2024, especially those who are entering university or entering high school for the first time?
I don't know that I've got a piece of advice other than a statement, and that is, you know, the world's your oyster. Like, I don't think I can pick a time in history where you boys and girls, men and women, have more opportunity to do anything. Like, it's awesome. You're so connected. Everything's at your fingertips. And I know that'll bring it. I know you have your own pressures to deal with in that regard, so I'm not diminishing those. But gone are the years where you've got these sort of monoliths in society from church, state, and employer. You know, you basically, 100 years ago, everyone went to the same church or whichever religion. They had the state, which dictated everything to them, and they had the workplace, and they usually had one workplace in their entire life. That's not going to be part of your, not in the same way. Those things won't dictate to you what you each do. And so one of the great problems you'll have is to sort of focus and decide a pathway. And I suppose if I did have a suggestion, more than advice, because who am I to give advice, right? But a suggestion would be specialize in one thing. And that, it's not about where you start, it's about where you finish. So, for a very long time, I think one of the mistakes I made when I look back, although I wouldn't change anything because I treasure where I'm at right now and the experiences I've had along the way. But I think that if I wanted politics initially, I was so focused on federal that I didn't open my mind enough to the prospect that it didn't matter where I started, you could finish anywhere. So I could have stood for state. And if I really, really wanted to go federal, I could then try and work that and maybe go for federal seat. It's fortuitous that I didn't, because now being in state, there's nothing else I seek. I love what I'm doing. But it's an important message. I was always very much focused on I want to be here, not understanding that sometimes you have to go through that journey. So pick something, specialize, and know with great confidence that with your generation, you have all the support around you and possibilities to do 5, 6, 7, 10, 20, 30 careers in your lifetime.
Yeah, because, with the government's investment into TAFE especially, I think, I've heard first 2 years of teaching degrees now are free. So there's so many opportunities for us nowadays, I know some of my friends in year 12 this year, like they've even considered doing teaching just because they get 2 years off of any HECS debt or any school fees at all. So there's so many opportunities out there for us.
Yeah, look, I think if I was your age, I would be seriously considering teaching, because I'd go, yeah, I could try that. Never love it. My dad was a sports teacher, so at schools. So my auntie was a teacher at primary schools. So I'd go, yeah, I'll start with that. I might really love it, and I might never leave. But then you might leave after you've done a couple of years or a few years and go on, and that might spawn a love for something else. I remember my stepmom saying to me, and I didn't pay enough attention, so pay attention to your mum, your dad, your step-parents. She would say she'd say this to her kids as well as myself and my brother, you should join the army, because the army pay for your HECS and they train you and you've got experience. So you come out with experience, no HECS debt, and paid at the end of the line. Now that's all great, but of course the prospect of me going to some war at that point didn't really enamor me. So, but it depends what you do, right? And for some people, they don't mind that. And actually, it wasn't that it was anti, going to some sort of battlefield. I just don't think that I had, I don't know, maybe I just didn't have enough. Maybe I was just too comfortable leading the kids' life I was leading, riding back and forth from home, and after school hanging out with mates, going, doing sport, all that sort of stuff, to sort of take you early out of that life and plonk you into a world where you're living and working and studying all the time is not as attractive as parents maybe think it is.
But at the end, you did end up going to, with your UN job, you ended up going to a lot of war zones and seeing all different experiences. So I guess your mum was kind of right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Well, she was absolutely right. I think if I had my time again, I'd either look at if the teaching stuff was available, I'd absolutely be looking at that. And I would look at, even in the Army or the Air Force, I would have looked at doing something like a paramedic or something like that I think I would have really enjoyed. Because there's so many professions in those sort of outfits, right? Like the military, there's 1,000 professions, from doctor to dentist to you name it.
Exactly. You can, even in the Army, you can even be an accountant in there. I think I've checked it out. Sometimes you can work as an accountant while in the Army. So many opportunities in there.
Yeah, there really is. Yeah, and it's like in the Air Force. Like if you've been an Australian Air Force pilot, they're treasured the world over because of their training, their background, and so they're a real asset. If you want to be an airline pilot for passenger airlines, then that's another pathway.
Yeah. So that's actually all the questions we have to ask you today, Nick. Again, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. It's been basically almost 2 hours we've spent with you. So
sorry,
hopefully
guys.
It didn't take you. I'm sorry that we took so
someone
much of
might
your
never
time.
watch it to the end. You might not get a single viewer to go all the way to the end. If they find it this far, well done.
Yeah, if you're still listening to this by now, congratulations.
That's right. You're still breathing. This is a great thing.
Yeah, so thank you again, Nick, for taking the time out of your day to come on the podcast with us and discuss these important issues and answer these important questions so our viewers get a great understanding of who you are as a person. So yeah, thank you again.
My pleasure, gentlemen. Thank you very much, George, Francis, and Tobias. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. See you
All
guys.
the best. Cheers.